Hey everybody. I made it back from my trip and I've got the haul with me, huge amount of wool, a few 100 pounds worth. And I kind of wanted to go through some examples of some of the things that I got, give you a few close-ups on what that looks like. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was raw wool safety. So if you are going to be processing raw wool, you want to make sure that you always have a pair of gloves. At the very least, a good pair of utility gloves. You don't want to be handling this stuff particularly barehanded because when it comes to you raw, there are little bits, and I'll show you a little bit here. Before it's skirted, there's going to be some bits that have like some fecal matter and stuff like that in it. So you always want to pay attention. Um, and it's particularly important to have a tetanus shot. So if you've got any bodily fluids on some of the wool and dirt and things like that, you want to make sure that you're current on your tetanus. If you have any kind of allergy to grasses or hay or anything like that, also make sure that you're wearing a mask while you do this. That'll really help any allergies from maybe flipping the fleeces around and things like that. So um, always make sure that you wash your hands afterwards. Don't touch your face. If you've got clothing, make sure that you wash your clothing. Try not to touch it too much after you've been handling a lot of raw wool. So today I'm just going to talk about some examples, and then next week we'll go into probably scouring and skirting, or rather skirting first and then scouring and preparing the wool to get ready to spin. So I've got several different examples of things here. First, this, what I pulled that little bit of matter out of on this one, this is a Lincoln wool. And this is a finer wool. It's got some very, very good crimp to it. And I'll pull out some really good locks here and show you what these locks look like. So we have some really nice locks. We've got some really nice locks here. Now, if you look at the crimp on this, it's got a really nice crimp. It's kind of loose and curly, and as you start to pull it apart, you can kind of see what that looks like. Now, we want to make sure that we wash this up real good. Of course, there's just a bunch of dirt in this. There's really not any, fecal matter or anything like that here. So that's what the Lincoln looks like. Got a nice long staple on it. This is going to be good spinning and garment type material. So next I have some mohair, and this mohair is actually a bit cleaner than the wool, and again it's got a nice curly lock on it. This stuff, you can add mohair to your wool if you want to add just a little bit of loft, and it will add some softness to your finished yarn after you're done. So this is nice and soft against the skin. There's not a lot of stretch in the fiber, so this is not necessarily something that you're going to want to use. It needs a little bit of extra bounce. Probably good for weaving, but again, if you want to combine it with wool, probably anywhere from 50-50 combination all the way down to, 10% wool and 90%, or sorry, 10% wool and, let's try that again, 10% mohair and 90% wool, you're going to get some good softness and loft from that spun yarn. So we've got another kind here that is white-faced U, and let me see if I can find a little bit longer lock here. So the white face has a little bit shorter staple. However, if you look real closely, I'll see if I can get the camera to focus on this. You see how crimpy that is in there? Lots and lots of crimp on this fiber. So this is going to spin up really, really well. It's a beautiful quality, super crimpy. I don't know if I can, there we go. Just lots of really nice crimp in that fiber, and it's very, very soft. This is going to be a fun one to spin. I'm sending a little sample of this, about a pound of it, off to my friend Dan from Gnome Spun Yarn to test some of this out and give me his opinion on this wool. So that is the white-faced ewe. I have some very beautiful merino here. This is very fine merino. We're talking 20 microns type fine. And this is from Ram. And just look at this fiber. It is, there we go. Just look at how thin that is. And this fiber, the merino in particular, is going to be very, very good against the skin. Very soft, spins up like a dream, has a little bit shorter staple, but a fairly good length still. The other nice thing about merino is that this is naturally antimicrobial. So in like the t-shirt that I'm wearing now is made out of merino wool, super light, and it keeps me warm and cool. It also wicks the sweat away, and it's antimicrobial, so it doesn't stink when you, if it absorbs sweat or anything like that. So that's the merino. So I had to switch over to my phone because the battery died in my other camera. So I just want to wrap this up real quick and we'll get out of your hair here pretty quick. But take a look at this fine black wool. Now, this again is really, really crimpy. And I'll try and spread this out a little bit for you so you can see the finer crimp in that. I mean, look at how pretty that is. And it's got a little bit of sunburn at the edges, but that's really not a big deal. Some of that can be overdyed as well. You get really, really nice, rich colors when you do some overdyeing. So it's really fun to be able to use some darker fibers that wouldn't normally get used when we are thinking about our wools and dyeing our wools. Most people think of white, but grays will give you a nice heather, blacks will give you some more darker jewel tones. And so maybe think a little bit outside of the box when you're starting to do some spinning and some dyeing of your fleeces and your fibers. So the last thing that I have here is some black and gray coarse wool. Now, some of this would probably be better for rugs and or needle felting. So here is, I'll pull out a little bit of this gray fiber. So you've got just this beautiful light gray color. And again, very, very crimpy. It'll be nice to spin up, but the thing is that this stuff in particular is a little coarser, so it's not going to be as soft next to the skin. It could be used for outer garments, something that you're going to wear clothing underneath, but you wouldn't want to use this wool for anything that's going real close to the skin. It'll tend to be a little bit scratchy once it gets there. So I've got some of that beautiful gray, and then I also have some darker gray, some really nice black. So these ones, again, you can already see that it's starting to felt just a little bit from just being in the bag. So this particular wool right here is going to be really, really good for anybody that does any kind of felting work, and for potentially rugs and for outer garments that won't go next to the skin. So the last thing that I really want to talk about is, we've already talked about using gloves, mask, and having a tetanus shot. 20 some odd years ago, I had a few goats die of tetanus. And it's something that can happen in any herd or any flock. It's not unique to any specific area. So you do want to make sure that you have a current tetanus shot, because you never know what you're going to find inside of a fleece. So now that we've discussed that for dealing with raw wool, if you are using any kind of equipment, for example, pickers or cards, or using a machine that makes roving, drum carters, you want to make sure that you always clean that equipment really, really well. You can use the veterinary grade antiseptic wash, or you can also just use rubbing alcohol. I wouldn't recommend using betadine because that might stain your equipment. But you want to make sure that those things are nice and clean, and that you don't have a lot of leftover material in those things after you're done using them. So any surface, including your tables and your buckets that you're using to wash, or if you're using a big basin or something like that, make sure that after you get done processing your wool, that you clean all of those surfaces. It's super, super important. You probably also could use like the Clorox wipes, or just add a little bit of Clorox to some bleach, maybe in a 25% Clorox, so like a 1 to 3 Clorox to water. And spray your surface real good with that. Let it sit for a few minutes and then wipe it off. So use safety and caution anytime you are working with raw wool. You're going to have, all that vegetable material. You're going to have, some fecal matter, maybe a little bit of urine staining, things like that within the wool, and a bunch of dirt. So you don't know what kind of microbes are living in that soil or in that wool. So take caution, and really just enjoy the process. It's labor intensive, but it is a lot of fun. So the next video, we're probably going to be talking about scouring, skirting and scouring. And that's where we really dig in to start preparing the wool to get ready to spin. So we will see all of you next week, and glad to be back, glad to be home. I came through a major Arctic blast over in Montana to get back home here over to the Willamette Valley. And but I had a nice, safe trip, and car stuffed full of wool. Thank God I had the bigger SUV instead of my own little car that I have sitting right over there. So anyway, take care, and we will see everybody next week when we talk about cleaning the wool to get ready to spin.